Hey everyone, I'm Paul, and today I'm reviewing the Toyota RAV8. Wait, that's not right. There's two separate RAV4s here. This is my 1997 RAV4, and I borrowed this 2008 RAV4 with the V6. That's the good one. Let's start by checking out the exterior of the old RAV4. It's cute and curvy, and definitely looks like a car from the 1990s. The plastic cladding along the sides give it a tough off-road look. The first generation RAV4 was sold in the US in 2-door and 4-door versions. I got the small one, and it's possibly one of the cutest cars you can get. The back part of the roof and windows is black, separating the top from the rest of the bodywork. Toyota made a soft top version where the back opens up, and you could get up to 2 sunroofs as an option. The third generation RAV4 is very common here in the United States. 100% of grandmas have one of these. Toyota did away with the plastic cladding and gave you plastic painted bumpers instead. The doors are mostly flat, and you only have slightly curved panels by the fenders and in the back. This car still has the spare tire attached to the back door that swings open. Toyota switched over to the standard lift gate that you see in most crossovers in the 4th generation. This limited edition has alloy wheels, a spoiler over the rear window, and a roof rack. If you want to catch all the radio stations in the old RAV4, you have to roll the window down and manually pull the antenna out. This thing gets over 3 feet long unless you forget to put it back in and it's broken, which is the case here. In the 2nd gen, Toyota moved the antenna to the right front fender. This is much better. For the 3rd generation, it's still on the fender, but Toyota figured out how to make the antenna smaller so you don't have to worry about it in the car wash. The 1st gen RAV4 had glass headlights. I installed the slightly newer lights from the 1998 to 2000 facelift model that has separate high and low beam bulbs. Unfortunately, the newer RAV4s all use plastic lenses for the headlights that turn yellow over time. This 3rd gen still has mostly clear headlights, but you can see the fogginess starting. You can keep them looking good with the occasional polishing. Let's take a look under the hood. My RAV4 has the 3S FE engine. Toyota didn't go hog wild with the spray paint. That was my doing. This is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that puts out 119 horsepower. It has a timing belt and 4 valves per cylinder with no extra fancy stuff. There is no insulation on the hood, so you hear a lot of the engine noise when driving the car. Under the hood of this V6 RAV4, you'll find the 3.5-liter 2GR FE engine that puts out 269 horsepower and 246 pound-feet of torque. This was the fastest Toyota sold in the US from 2006 to 2012. Let's take off this engine cover. It's plastic with a layer of foam to quiet down that engine noise. The earliest RAV4 had a distributor and spark plug wires, and it got updated to coil packs with wires in 1998. The 2nd gen went one step further with coil-on-plug ignition. The 3rd gen has all the good stuff, including coil-on-plug ignition, variable valve timing on the intake and exhaust valves driven by a timing chain. No timing belt replacement needed here. The battery and computer are up front with the airbox just behind it. You can reach all the fluids from above, but you can't see much from up here. You'll have to go under the car to reach the serpentine belt. The old RAV4 has separate belts for the alternator, AC, and power steering. My RAV4 has the E250F 5-speed manual transmission with all-wheel drive and a manual vacuum-operated center locking differential. Let's take a look under the 3rd gen RAV4. You can't see anything with the covers, but it has the U151F 5-speed automatic transmission. This one also has a locking center differential for off-road and snowy conditions. The 1st gen RAV4 uses McPherson strut suspension up front with a single piston floating caliper. The 2nd and 3rd gen didn't see many changes to the front suspension, but if you take a look under the car, you'll see a bigger subframe and heavier duty lower control arms. Following the exhaust, you'll find a giant muffler in the middle of the car instead of the back. By not having the muffler at the back of the car like the old RAV4, Toyota was able to add extra storage under the floor. The first RAV4 has trailing arm suspension stabilized by ball joints. In the 2nd gen, they upgraded these to bushings for better stability. The 3rd generation is a completely different car. Here we have a subframe and big heavy-duty control arms in the back. The rear diff doesn't look like a pumpkin from a truck anymore. The third generation RAV4 has the world's easiest hitch installation. There's nothing in the way, just throw in a few bolts. Let's move on to the interior of the car. In 1997, you get a giant back door that swings open. In 2008, you get the same back door, but this one has a subwoofer and a cargo net. When you only have two doors, they make them huge. It's actually easier to get into a four-door vehicle because the doors don't need as much room to open. The newer interior looks really nice. The gauge cluster looks sporty with a big speedometer in the middle and a tachometer on the left. The old RAV4, of course, screams 90s style. In 97, you get the square airbag and analog gauges and odometer. Moving on, let's look at the radio in the 2008 limited edition. This car has the JBL audio system with a CD player that can play MP3 files. Remember when you couldn't play a burned CD unless you bought a new radio? Well, this car solved that problem. Volume and tuning are knobs, and you have preset buttons. All of this makes sense. The front doors have speakers down low, but they also put tweeters by the mirrors. The rear speakers are in the back doors by the floor. Not ideal, but it works. In the rear door, you'll find an 8-inch subwoofer. Wait, is that actually smaller than that? This isn't the first time Toyota has played that trick. The radio in the older car is a single DIN unit. I installed an aftermarket media player so I can connect my phone to it. My car has manual roll-up windows and 5¼ inch speakers down by the floor where you can't hear them. The speaker grill looks like it's covering a 6½ inch speaker, but look at that! Not all the holes are drilled out. First generation RAV4s got smaller speakers if you have manual windows, and the fancy people with power windows got the bigger speakers. I added tweeters up by the mirrors in my car to improve the sound. Rear speaker placement in the two-door RAV4 is excellent. They're up high. If you got the older four-door, the rear speakers are in the cargo area by the floor. Not good. The limited edition has dual zone climate control where the driver and passenger can adjust temperature independently. These buttons are easy to use, although I think knobs for the temperature and fan speed would be better. This car has two rectangular vents in the middle of the dash above the radio and two round vents on each side. These vents are cool because you can turn them and you can close them. The first gen RAV4 has a very simple climate control setup with sliders. You'll find two vents in the middle and one on each side. This car has the crotch vent under the steering wheel to keep your bits and pieces fresh when you're driving around. Looking down the center console, we have a 12-volt power outlet, heated seat controls, and a hill descent control button. You get two cup holders with removable inserts for when the kids are screaming in the back, the beers aren't enough, and you have to switch to wine. All third-gen RAV4s were sold in the US with an automatic transmission. Each front door has a water bottle holder that extends back for storing more stuff. The back seat passengers each get a water bottle holder in the doors, and both front seats have cargo nets. If you fold down the center seat, you can hold two more beers back here for the kids. In the back of the RAV4, you can find two more compartments and cup holders. Why? You could get a third row seat in this car as an option. In the old RAV4, the center console is very narrow, and you get one small cup holder. In the two-door model, each rear passenger gets a beer can-sized cup holder. In the 90s, smoking in cars was a thing, so you got front and rear ashtrays too. The newer RAV4 has a nice shallow compartment in the top of the center console. If you grab the other latch, you can open up the deeper compartment. You just have to make sure your box of wine doesn't block the aux cable for your phone. Both RAV4s have a button to lock the center differential for off-road driving. Here you get a vodka bottle-sized storage bin above the glove box, and you can put a couple more down below. The second and third gen RAV4 both have a cabin air filter behind the glove box. The first gen does not. The seats and door panels have a casino bus pattern on them, and the upholstery was very well made. 24 years later, it's all still in good condition. This 2008 RAV4 has 160,000 miles, and the leather seats are torn. In old Toyotas, cloth upholstery was a lot more durable. Leather is easier to clean, but is usually bad in older cars. The passenger side is fine. The rear seats can slide forward to make room for the poorly behaved kids in the third row. You can seat 3 people here unless you fold down the cup holders. The seats fold all the way down to make a completely flat cargo area. This is easier to deal with than pulling the seats out of the second generation RAV4, although I think you lose a little bit of height on the inside compared to the older car. The rear seats also recline a bit, making this a nice place to be on road trips. The older car has a few tricks up its sleeve too. You can fold the seats flat and flip them forward. The little kickstand props them up, and there's even a storage spot for the headrests. This makes the storage area much bigger. It's still laughably small in the 2-door, but the larger 4-door model is quite good for cargo and camping. You need a wrench to get the seats out, but check this out. You can fold all the seats flat and you can sleep in here. All the way in the back, the 3rd gen has storage cubbies for a jack and jumper cables. There's even more storage under the floor. Here we have a shallow bin, and where most cars have their spare tire, you get a giant deep compartment. This is where the 3rd row kids put their feet. Remove these plastic pieces to store your cargo cover. Fold the floor down and nobody will know you have stuff in here. The rear door has a small cargo net and you even get a light. My RAV4 has a big bin on the right and another smaller one on the left side. They all have straps inside to keep your stuff from bouncing up and disappearing forever into the car's fenders. Car reviewers have a thing for visors, so I'll check them out too. The front dome light can turn on with the doors, and the map lights can turn on independently. Here you get a sweet digital compass built into the rearview mirror. If you don't need directions because you're a man, you can turn it off. The compass shows you the direction the mirror is pointing, not the car. It's an interesting quirk. On the ceiling, you get a compartment for your sunglasses and separate map lights. The limited edition also comes with a sunroof. Pushing the slide open button will move the glass and the cover back. Pushing the rocker the other way will close the glass, but the sunshade stays open. If you keep holding the button, the back of the glass tilts up. Let's do that again. The glass dips down in the back and slides open. When you close the sunroof, the wind guard at the front goes down. Hitting the tilt up button opens the back slightly for ventilation. Both visors have a mirror with a sliding cover and a light. The light turns off when you close the cover. The light also turns off when you move the visor up in case you forgot to close it. Smart. The visors move to the side and extend out to block the sun better. You can also use it so you don't see your gross kids in the rearview mirror. In the middle, you have a basic dome light on the ceiling, and in the back, there are these 2 weird covers. What's in there? After doing a little searching online, I found these are mounting points for a dog barrier. You can keep Fluffy in the back so he doesn't mess up the interior. I want to point out one more quirk in the 1st gen interior. The right rear window opens up as a vent, but the other side does not. Toyota was concerned exhaust would get back into the car on the left side if that window opened. Not venting all the cigarette smoke is fine though. Alright, let's take this 3rd generation RAV4 for a spin, shall we? Right off the bat, I can tell this is a much better car than the 1st generation, especially with that V6. It takes off from a standstill, it just launches the car right away. There's lots of torque, it's quite enjoyable to drive. I also looked up the IIHS crash test ratings for this car, and it does good in all categories. This RAV4 is built on a different platform than the older one, so it's a bigger car, and with the moderate overlap front impact test, it does well because the car is just bigger and your legs don't get squished when you crash the car. It has side curtain airbags, so it does well in the side impact test. The only thing that IIHS didn't like about this car was the seats. I guess it doesn't control your head very well. You know, break your neck or something if you hit it hard enough, but that's not a big deal. Well, maybe it is. All right, the highway on-ramp test. We're gonna do 0 to 60 starting now. accelerates really well, actually. The third generation RAV4 is much better behaved on the highway than the first gen. It's much more stable, you get a smoother ride, it's a lot quieter inside the car as well. You just feel more confident, you know. The other car, you're just kind of all over the place, especially because I've lifted my short wheelbase two-door RAV4. It's just kind of scary on the highway, actually. I would much rather do a road trip in this car. I mean, you also have a lot more room for your stuff. This is definitely a better highway vehicle than the first generation. Driving this car around town is pretty nice too. The instant torque you get from that V6 makes it a little bit more of a thrill compared to my first generation, where you really have to struggle to get it up to speed. You have a fairly bumpy road here, but it's not throwing me around that much. Obviously you feel the bumps, but they're smoothed out, and it's not causing the car to skate to the right and left like it does with my lifted short wheelbase RAV4. It's just kind of stable. I can just go through this stuff, not really use the steering wheel, and it's not going to jump off the road right away. Alright, driving the first generation of RAV4 around. It definitely is a lot smaller, a lot more buzzy, a lot louder in here. The engine is much weaker. You have to rev it way up to get this thing to move. But, you know, in a way it's kind of fun. You have a manual transmission. It takes a bit more work to accomplish anything in this car. But, you know, it's more engaging, I guess. Like, if you installed a lawnmower engine into a shopping cart and that was your car. That's kind of what this is. When you floor it, not a whole lot happens. The engine gets louder, but as far as like acceleration, there's really not much of that. If you look up the IIHS crash test ratings for the first generation RAV4, it rates marginal. That's 2 steps below good. If you crash the front of the car into something, it kind of gets squished because this car is small. You end up injuring your leg and your head bounces off the B-pillar. Back in 1997, they didn't do a side impact test, but the second generation RAV4 rated marginal. It did not do well at all on the side impact, and I would be willing to bet that this car is even worse. Notice the pillars are very small. There's no side airbags or anything like that. So if something hits you from the side, it'll actually physically hit you. It'll just go right through this stuff and it's gonna hit you. All right, highway on-ramp test. 0 to 60, starting now. And that's 60. That's enough. It definitely takes a bit of work to get this car up to speed. It's not gonna zip on up there like that V6 RAV4. Notice there's quite a bit of noise in here. I did install sound deadening insulation and it helped, but it's still quite a bit louder than that third generation RAV4. The other car is bigger. They've designed a lot more insulation and deadening into it than this one, and it's just a much better car for a road trip, especially this little guy. 2-door, there's not much room for your stuff. You got wind noise everywhere, you got road noise. It's definitely a little more feeling the road. You're kind of like in a little go-kart here. So why would you buy a first generation RAV4? Well, there are 2 reasons. The first reason is maybe all you have is $3,500 and you need a car that's decently reliable and you're not afraid of doing some major repairs once in a while. The second reason is maybe nostalgia, like you like this car, you like the way that it looks, or perhaps you want to build up an off-roader. This car is easier to work on, it's lighter weight, it's smaller, and most of the parts are still available. So if you're trying to build up some cool thing, this is a great car to do it to. Of course, that third generation RAV4 is better in almost every way. It's safer, it's quieter, it's more stable on the highway, there's more room for your stuff, there's more features. It's just a better car. If all you want to do is drive around and do car things, you got to get that third gen instead of the first gen, obviously. All right, I've shown you the differences between these 2 RAV4s. Now it's up to you to tell me which one you like better. Leave a comment below.